Hello, everybody, and welcome to A Bold Plan to End the Western Water Crisis. I am Brian Sullivan. I am your moderator today, who will be helped extensively by the National Infrastructure team, both Stu and Angela. And I'll just do a quick introduction of myself. I am the Snohomish County Treasurer, a large urban county just north of Seattle, where we build all the big Boeing planes. And I have a 40-year history of focusing on public finance and infrastructure. And as the county treasurer, I operate two infrastructure programs for lending, and we have over $50 million in loans. But we have trillions of dollars in problems. And this is why I'm involved with the NIB and why they've asked me to moderate today. So having said that, I think we'd like to move on to our speakers. And our first speaker will be Alphecca Muttardy. And did I say that right, Alphecca? You know, I keep trying. A brief introduction, though, is Alphecca is a professional macroeconomist, former senior economist, International Monetary Fund of the International Monetary Fund, chief economic advisor to the Coalition for the National Infrastructure Bank, and a member of the advisory board of the coalition. She's an expert in macroeconomic assessments for the United States economy, including the development of the National Infrastructure Bank policy to finance infrastructure needs, while promoting job creation and economic growth at the IMF, and is a resident representative to Ghana, 2004-2006. I did not know that. So having said that, we will introduce our speakers as we go. And Alphecca, I believe the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and welcome to everybody. Just a caveat there. I'm retired from the IMF, so they're not endorsing anything on this project, but I did use all of my macroeconomic skills that I learned there in order to work on this project. So for those of you who are new to this concept on the National Infrastructure Bank, I wanted to give you a quick overview here. We have a bill in the U.S. Congress to create a $5 trillion public bank to lend for infrastructure projects all across the country. The reason we need this bank is because we cannot adequately finance infrastructure through budgets. We need an off-budget public bank to do the job. The good news is we've had four really large banks like this in our nation's past, starting after the American Revolutionary War, going through the Great Depression and World War II. These banks not only built infrastructure, but they built a lot of water infrastructure, which we're going to discuss specifically today. Very successful model. They're not around today because their charter's timed out. That's why we need another bank like this. This bank operates off budget, does not need funding from the federal budget, is capitalized using existing treasuries, and gives out loans just the same as any commercial bank. It will cover $5 trillion in project loans in 21 infrastructure categories. 18 of them are the ones that are routinely monitored and thought of as infrastructure, and that includes water systems, drinking water systems, wastewater systems, that kind of thing. That's sort of thought of as traditional infrastructure. But there's another kind of water that we really need to focus on today, and that is large-scale water projects, water augmentation, because we're running out of water in areas, especially where we grow our nation's food. So we have a water supply crisis. We have had climate-induced droughts, heat waves, floods are the new normal. All of that's the new normal. And the problem with the water shortages is not only enough drinking water for residents in urban areas, but also for the production of food, much of which takes place in the western half of the United States, where we have severe water problems. We've have drought monitors that have recorded this, especially drought conditions that were really, really bad in the 2020s and 2010s. A little bit of alleviation, but we seem to be heading back into another drought season now. But the basic problem that we're having is a severe groundwater depletion. This is all over the United States. You can see it on this satellite map from GRACE satellite map, which shows areas where shallow groundwater is absolutely running dry, these areas in orange. And it's not just the Western United States, it's very severe on the Ogallala Aquifer, all of these states of the Colorado River system. But we even have drought problems on the East Coast of all places, and the southern, the Gulf of Mexico areas too. A lot of this is where we grow our agriculture. So that's something that we really need to, we're taking water out for agriculture uses about 75% of all the nation's water. And we're taking it out faster than precipitation can fill the aquifers back up again. So that's our number one problem. And then we have a problem along the Colorado River system, which Don Siefkes is going to talk about in just a minute. That water system is reaching dead pool status. The reservoirs are only 27% full. Pretty soon water won't be able to come over the top of the dams any longer and produce electricity or flow water down into lower states. So that's a very big, severe problem. Our National Infrastructure Bank provides a separate $200 billion for water projects. The legislation requires that loans must be for sustainable projects that produce the highest benefit to cost. So it could cover a whole different slew of different kinds of water augmentation projects, everything from this Colorado River solution to fill it back up again, down to irrigation and conservation and reservoirs storage. But the bank wants to pick the very best projects that will produce the best cost benefit analysis. So Don's going to talk about this solution for the Colorado River system. I'll turn it over to him, and then if there's time, I'll come back and I'll offer one more solution for the shallow groundwater problem. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Don.
That's great, Alphecca. Good job. Maybe a quick introduction of Don. And if I could pronounce this correctly, Don, it's Siefkes, correct? Don Siefkes? Is that?
That's correct.
No, my Irish education is coming through. Don is a retired design executive with General Motors Corporation. He is the executive director of E100 Ethanol Group. Mr. Siefkes is an MIT graduate, a BS in chemical engineering, and a University of Michigan grad. Sorry, I went to the UW. And with the MBA in Business Administration Management. He is on the advisory board for the Coalition of the National Infrastructure Bank, and he's been widely published along with Alphecca Muttardy on solution of the Western water crisis. This includes Yahoo Finance, San Francisco Chronicle, the Desert News, and the Los Angeles Journal Review, the largest circulation publication in Nevada. Don, take it away.
Very good. Thank you, Brian. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yep, very well.
All right. I've got an agenda to go through in the next 15 minutes or so, but I would like to just tell you very briefly how I got started in this. My wife and I were on a pleasure cruise on the lower Mississippi River a couple years ago. And as part of that cruise, they took us over to another river just west of the lower Mississippi that I'd never heard of, called the Atchafalaya River. That is a very big river. It's 43% as big as the lower Mississippi. It's home to many crocodiles and a lot of water moccasins. It basically is a flood control mechanism by the Army Corps of Engineers to prevent flooding on the lower Mississippi. Now, I live in California, the San Francisco Bay Area, and as I was flying back to California, I looked down from my window seat and I saw the California Aqueduct. And I thought to myself when I got home, because this thing about water shortage in Southern California even 2 years ago, was an important subject. So why can't we build an aqueduct from this river in Louisiana to Lake Powell, back at the Glen Canyon Dam? And I wrote a couple of op-eds for the Desert Sun newspaper down in Palm Springs. Now, they published those. They got the highest number of responses to those op-eds they've ever had. All were negative. Well, 95% of them were extremely negative on the idea. And I thought it sounded sort of ridiculous, too, at the beginning, because 1,200 miles is a long aqueduct. But I studied it more intently, and really, it would be easy for us to do this. So here's my agenda. What I want to do is, first of all, define exactly what we mean when we say Colorado River Basin states, just in case There's some doubt on that. And then I want to talk a little bit about the current situation, which is very difficult. The consequences of not taking action, which are very severe, and our possible solution. And then finally, what you can do to get this thing going. This is the Colorado River Basin, 7 states. Provides water for 40 million people, irrigation for tens of billions of dollars of food production, and contributes at least $1.4 trillion of gross domestic product. These 7 states are divided into 3 groups legally. The lower basin states, which are Arizona, California, and Nevada, and the upper basin states that are New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, and Wyoming. That has nothing to do with geography. The phrase lower basin means that those 3 states, California, Nevada, and Arizona, take water downriver of the Glen Canyon and Hoover dams south of Lake Powell and Lake Mead. The upper basin states have rights to the Colorado River water, but they take it up from above the dams. That's very important because as time goes on this year, you're going to see some lawsuits flying back and forth between the upper basin and the lower basin states over how we're going to split the current water in the Colorado River up. So what's the current situation? Here's the current situation. As of Tuesday, Lake Mead was 32.4% full and it had 2.72 trillion gallons of water. Lake Powell, as of yesterday, had 1.83 trillion gallons of water. The total capacity of those 2 reservoirs, the 2 largest reservoirs in the United States, only contain 4.6 trillion gallons of water. They are only 28% full, or the opposite, they're 72% empty. Now, we think a reasonable objective is to try to get these 2 reservoirs to 50% capacity. That would greatly relieve pressure on the system. The electric generators can run at that level. They can provide enough water under the current distribution system and finally work out a more longer-term solution. But to get to 50% capacity, we need 3.5 trillion gallons of water brought up to Lake Mead and Lake Powell. And if you don't remember anything else from my talk today, I want you to remember that number. It is a massive amount of water. And we've had enough meetings with the congressmen and their staffs to know that they don't understand how much water is involved here. Now, why is this happening? It's happening because of low snowfall on the western slope of the Rocky Mountains. All the water in the Colorado River comes from snowmelt. Now, climatologists that study this for a living think this change, for practical purposes, is permanent. And at least for our purposes of anyone alive today. The current agreement, which actually started in 1922, it's been modified a couple of times. It was last changed in 2023 in terms of how water is distributed amongst these 7 states, runs out at the end of 2026. And the Bureau of Reclamation, let me get rid of that thing. I can't. Now, the Bureau of Reclamation that actually owns these dams published a draft environmental impact statement in January of this year with 4 potential action alternatives for after 2026. None of these suggestions provided any new water to the Colorado River, only conservation and cutbacks. There were 18,000 public comments, mostly negative. In fact, over 95% of them were extremely negative on this plan. The danger is dead pool status for both the Glen Canyon and Hoover dams. They're actually, dead pool means there's actually an electric dead pool and a water dead pool. The electric dead pool is higher. That's the point at which you can no longer generate electricity. And water dead pool is where water can't go through the dams because it's dropped through the outlet pipes. Bureau of Reclamation has set an October 1st deadline for these 7 states to agree on how to split this lower levels of the water flow in the Colorado. It's not likely that there's going to be an agreement because they've been trying for a year. The Upper Basin Commission, which consists of the 4 upper basin states, is going to meet on April 24th and it's unknown exactly what they're going to come out of that meeting with. But they have to get agreement with the lower basin states, and they haven't been able to do it so far. Well, what are the consequences if we can't agree on how to split up this water? Well, they are quite severe. Actually, they're very severe. You are talking about massive cutbacks in water supply, as high as 58% for Arizona, 46% for Nevada. You're talking up to $3 trillion in lower gross domestic product by 2060. These losses come from agricultural farming, the loss of the irrigation pumps. Population and housing construction are going to decrease, at least in all the lower basin states. The people that run CAP published a report. I gave you a link to it here below. Arizona will probably lose at least 8% of their employment by the year 2060, and you're talking about direct water rationing all over the Southwest. Now, the Bureau of Reclamation has stated that they are not going to allow Lake Powell to go below 3,500 feet elevation. 3,500 feet, actually, I think it's 3,490, is electric dead pool, which means Glen Canyon will no longer be able to produce electricity. They're getting close. As of Tuesday this week, it was at 3526. Now, 26 feet is still, there's some leeway there to play. But if it goes below 3490, you're talking about physical damage to the internal structure of Glen Canyon Dam. And the Bureau of Reclamation says they just simply cannot let that happen. And their solution is simply not to release water from that dam, which means downstream water levels are going to drop. Now, we could spend all day talking about the specifics, but for those of you who would like a copy of these PowerPoint slides, I've put some links to various reports that are out there in the major news media on this subject, which you can read at your leisure. It's quite terrifying. So, what is our, actually, I should tell you too, yesterday I happened to fly from Detroit back to California through Las Vegas, and I got a great bird's eye view of Lake Mead from my airplane. Well, it is really scary. You can see that water level line that existed for decades, and it is way down. It's just a very frightening thing to see. In any case, here's a proposed solution. We think we should consider building a water conveyance system. The word aqueduct really isn't a good really a good word to use. It's a water conveyance system. It always consists of open channels, siphons, tunnels, and pipelines, but a system from going from a place in Louisiana on the Atchafalaya River that I mentioned earlier, right here, about 300 miles upriver from New Orleans, across Texas, New Mexico, and up to the Glen Canyon Dam. Or alternatively, taking some water from the outflow channel of Lake Tahoe to the Glen Canyon Dam. No one's suggesting we take water from Lake Tahoe, but just for intellectual purposes, Lake Tahoe has 40 trillion gallons of water in it, okay? There is no shortage of water in the United States. There is a shortage of water in certain places where we need water. Water really should be treated like oil. Oil is not distributed evenly. Mother Nature has put it in the Permian Basin in Texas and in the North Slope of Alaska. And we built pipelines to build this crude oil all over the place and don't think anything of it. And the water supply, in my opinion, is the same. Mother Nature has a fantastic desalination system, ocean water evaporation to clouds, to rain, to land, to rivers, and back to the ocean. It creates phenomenal amounts of water. Now, this is a big project, yes, to consider doing, but we've done big projects in this country before. These two black lines are two oil pipelines that were built within 1 year, 24 inches in diameter, 20 inches in diameter, to pump crude oil from the Permian Basin in Texas up to New Jersey to get that crude oil refined into fuel for launching the D-Day invasion. I went back and looked it up. those lines employed 16,000 people at one time or another, and they laid 2,700 miles of pipe within a year. And they faced a lot of the same problems that we would face with this. They had to go through over 300 episodes of eminent domain. They had to get cooperation from amongst the various states. All of those same problems would exist on building a large aqueduct. The same thing happened when they built the California aqueduct. So I'd like to show you a few here's another slide. And in terms of water, we have done this many times before. We have built the California aqueduct, the Los Angeles aqueduct, the Colorado River aqueduct, the Central Arizona project. It's not on this map, but the All-American Canal that goes close to the border with Mexico that provides water to all those farms in Southern California. I'd like to spend a little bit of time on this chart. Let's talk about some real numbers here. And by the way, you don't have to take notes, because if you want copies of these slides, you can have them. The Los Angeles aqueduct is 5,000 gallons per second. The Catskills aqueduct, which takes water from the Catskills Mountain down to New York City. The Colorado River aqueduct, 12,000 gallons a second. The All-American Canal, 15,000 gallons a second. The California aqueduct, the big one, almost 100,000 gallons a second of water. The Central Arizona project, roughly 15,000 gallons per second. The Coachella Canal that feeds the east end of the Coachella Valley, Palm Springs, Palm Desert, La Quinta, and all those rich towns. These were all constructed, and they all had people saying at the beginning, oh, we shouldn't do this. It's too much work. It's too expensive, blah, 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 blah. Wasn't. It worked. And now all these people, 40 million people in the Southwest, also in New York City, San Francisco has another, you could call it an aqueduct from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir up in Yosemite down to the city. We have brought water from where it is to where it isn't many times in this country, and much of it was financed by the last national infrastructure bank we had. Now, on to the Chapalaya River that I personally really like. As of Tuesday this week, this river was running at 1,590,000 gallons a second. Okay, not a minute or an hour, a second. And the long-term average since the 1930s, where the Army Corps of Engineers has kept track of it, has been 1.4 million gallons per second. The Lake Tahoe outflow averages about 7,000 gallons per second of water. So what we propose is that we build a water conveyance system, at least from the Chapalaya River up to the Glen Canyon Dam. I'd like to get it to the San Juan Dam, but that's at 6,000 feet. That might be a little high. But anyway, we need to get 3.5 trillion gallons of water to get Lake Mead and Lake Powell to 50% capacity. There's 86,400 seconds in a day. So simple math tells you we need to pump 4.32 billion gallons a day of water to do that. And how long would it take us to do that? At 50,000 gallons a second, it would take us 2.2 years. That is really fast, okay? You want to do it in 4.4 years? Okay, build a water conveyance system that takes 25,000 gallons a second. But I happen to like that word 50. Now, when you read some of those articles on this subject online off of Google, a lot of people, well, we'll just build some desalination plants on the Baja California water and we'll just pump it up there. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, desalination plants are too small. And you would need a lot of them to do it. In Sorek, Israel, we have 2 desalination plants. Plant A, which puts out 1,960 gallons a second, started up in 2013. The second desalination plant B is a little larger. It's a little over 2,000 gallons a second. That question mark is there because I'm not sure it runs at capacity. But in any case, these things are the latest and greatest in terms of building desalination plants, in terms of efficiency. They're reverse osmosis plants. But once they get built, you have to have natural gas to run them. And it takes a lot of natural gas. So to get to 50,000 gallons a second, how many of these Sorek type plants would you need? You'd need 25 of them, okay? And that's going to cost you anywhere from 75 to $100 billion. Could the National Infrastructure Bank finance that easily? Yes, this bank could finance easily 25 desalination plants. But how are you going to get the stuff to build 25 desalination plants? And after you build them and got them going, what do you have? You have 50,000 gallons a second of water, but you still have to build a water conveyance system to get it up to the Glen Canyon Dam, or build an alternative infrastructure to get the water to where it can feed the crops that we grow in the Southwest and to people's homes. It's just simply impractical to use desalination, even though desalination has some utility in providing drinking water for coastal cities. Well, I just threw this on here because I don't think a lot of people in this country understand that Lake Tahoe has 40 trillion gallons of water. And I just put that there so people know there's no shortage of water, okay? It's all where it's placed. Now, the advantage of thinking about the Atchafalaya River and Lake Tahoe is neither of those two sources of water have a real political base behind them. There is no commercial traffic. There is no electric generation done with those two water sources. The water from Lake Tahoe simply flows into Pyramid Lake of Nevada and evaporates into the atmosphere. The Atchafalaya River just flows into the Gulf of Mexico. No commercial shipping, no electricity generation, and we're talking about taking maybe 3 to 4% of it to get to that 50,000 gallons a second. Now, what does 50,000 gallons a second look like? This is a picture from Google Earth, somewhere out around Modesto in the Central Valley of California. The two yellow lines on the left are Interstate 5, the main drag down the Central Valley of California. On the right, this black line is the California Aqueduct, 100,000 gallons per second of water flowing south to Los Angeles. It's about the same size as an interstate highway. And if this is 100,000 gallons per second, 50,000 gallons per second would be half this size. So I don't want anybody trying to tell me that it costs more to build this thing than it does to build this thing. I think those cost analyses are very, very similar.
John, about 3 more minutes?
Yep.
Okay.
So what did this thing cost? Well, here's the cost, okay? We have about 49,000 miles of interstate highway in the United States. In 2024 dollars, it cost us $634 billion. So that's $13 million a mile. To build a 1,200-mile aqueduct, assuming it costs the same as an interstate highway, which I think is very reasonable, you're talking $13 billion. The Colorado River Aqueduct, built in the 1930s. This is a mixture of open channel tunnels, siphons, and pipes. There's 144 siphons in the Colorado River Aqueduct. Some of that, terrain would be very similar to bringing water from Lake Tahoe down to Lake Mead. If you want to extrapolate the cost of it, that'd be about $26 billion. It cost $220 million in 1931 dollars, but that $220 million included building Parker Dam, which formed Lake Havasu, which provides water for Phoenix and Tucson through the Central Arizona Project. We don't have to build the dam. So the Central Arizona Project cost us about $14 billion, and the big one, the California Aqueduct, cost us about $18 billion. Just to give you some concept of what we're talking about here, Google is investing $40 billion to build 3 data centers in West Texas. So the cost of this isn't very much to solve the problem and protect $1.4 trillion in gross domestic product and in the whole Colorado Basin state. So I think I'll stop there and just turn it back to Brian for any questions.
Why don't we wait till the end after our last speaker for questions and for Q&A? That might be the most efficient.
Brian, can I have 1 more minute?
Sure, of course.
Okay. 1 more minute. What can you do to help this? Anyone listening to the sound of my voice? Number 1, you want to call your congressional representative and get them to sign on as co-sponsors to HR 5356, like Alphecca just discussed with us. in this bill, I'm going to make it clear, there's nothing in this bill about building an aqueduct or a water conveyance system to Glen Canyon Dam. This is a financing mechanism to do that. We have this idea of building this water conveyance system, which we've done before to bring water. Now, once that's done, we need co-sponsors to get this bill passed. And you've got to call and write your congressional representatives. It's not going to happen otherwise. And after that, these representatives have to work in combination with other political leaders like governors and other political leaders in their states to get the Army Corps of Engineers to use their expertise to come up with an actual detailed plan on how to build it. The Army Corps can do that. There may be other people that could do it, like the people that built the cap, but you've got to tell them you want them to have the Army Corps step in here and start to do it. The best example of that recently is out here in San Francisco. The San Francisco Port of San Francisco and the San Francisco Waterfront Coastal Flood Study. They did a tremendous piece of work, 218 pages. I read the whole thing. The Army Corps knows how to fix the San Francisco seawall, which is a critical thing to do out here. They have an excellent plan. They can't get the money to do it. They only have $400 million. They need $4.5 billion. This bill can finance that. And I know we're not talking about the San Francisco area, but this is how they did it. The port went over in some detail with me exactly how they got the Army Corps to do this study, and they did it working through their congressional representatives. The Army Corps takes direction from Congress, won't take direction from anyone else. Enough said. Brian, back to you.
Don, thank you as usual. You're the best. One of the best presentations as always. As I said earlier, we're going to take questions for Q&A at the end. So why don't we move on to our next?
Can you take your PowerPoint down?
Yes. It should be off now.
The boss has spoken, right? So our next speaker is James Sved. James, I pronounced that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Yay. James is a leading architectural historian and restoration architect in the U.S., specializing in historic preservation. His notable projects include the University of Virginia, the College of William and Mary, the Science Museum of Virginia, and Main Street Station, Richmond, Virginia. The Main Street Station project earned Mr. Sved Restoration of the Year honors and was featured on the U.S. postage stamp. He has many other projects and awards under his belt. Mr. Sved lives in Malibu, California with his wife, Anna. And James, take it away.
Thank you very much. I like to, as a restoration architect, I like to operate under the premise of win-win scenarios. So let's go back for a second to the Mississippi Delta that we just spoke about. At the very end of the Mississippi Delta is the Bonnet Carré Spillway, which was built in 1931 as a response to the Great Mississippi Flood of 1927. It was built by the Corps of Engineers with the finest of 19th century advancements, meaning the entire spillway is operated by 8x12 boards that slide into little slots. Not a very efficient 21st century response to protecting and moving and handling water. Currently, the Bonnet Carré Spillway drops about 250,000 cubic feet per second of water into the Mississippi Sound, and that's causing a problem not just for the movement of water. It's causing problems for everything else. It has changed the salinity of the Mississippi Sound to the point where it is affecting the oyster, shrimping, and fishing industries and the entire socioeconomic way of life for 70 million people who live along the coast of the Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and northern Florida. After Katrina, they took clay out of the spillway, and that is They took it out of the spillway to shore up some of the leaking areas around some of the cities in that area, and to solve the problem with Katrina, specifically in New Orleans. But that has all had a devastating effect on the marine ecosystem and on the socioeconomic way of life. In 2019, 10 trillion cubic feet of water was dumped into the Mississippi Sound. What that's done is they've gone from 400,000 sacks of oysters per year during their oyster harvest to less than 400. So we have to think about how, in solving the Western water crisis, we have a win-win opportunity to solve the problems of the Mississippi Sound and of the entire coastal communities as well. And moving water is nothing new. Moving water is something, our known human civilization is approximately 6,000 years old. It's probably older, but that which we know and that which we study and understand is about 6,000 years old, going back to the Sumerians in the Middle East. The Sumerians moved water for agriculture and and to move water in and out of their cities. In ancient Babylon, they did this. The ancient Chinese were masterful at moving water. We've been moving water as a human civilization where we need it for literally 6,000 years, at least. There's no reason why we can't continue to do that. And there's no reason why we can't benefit on both ends in doing so. We can solve the water crisis in the West by moving the water we need to the West, while at the same time taking water where we have too much of it, too much fresh water, and moving it out of there so that the seawater can return and the marine ecosystems can return. And by the way, if you want to see a video or two about how devastated things are in the Gulf Coast, you can go to my website, subseasustainability.org, and you can see some videos from the coalition down there that talk exactly about how devastating too much fresh water has been for them. So the opportunity we have here is to take that fresh water and move it somewhere where we can move it to the highest and best use and for the greatest benefit for all of us in the United States. Thank you.
Oops, great. Thank you, James. Much appreciated. Now we'll move on to Alphecca. In my notes, I have you to follow up with some final thoughts. You have to unmute yourself.
Letting me come back again to talk about one more proposal that the National Infrastructure Bank can help with. And I love James's comments about making our proposal sustainable and having the maximum benefit, because we've also studied a lot about making infrastructure resilient on the Gulf Coast, especially to incoming hurricanes. So another aspect of that is we have to rebuild up the whole wetland aquaculture below the Mississippi, below the city of New Orleans, so that we can protect the city of New Orleans from incoming hurricanes, and so that we don't have well water going bad in lower regions of that wetlands where people live. So we can handle all of this at the same time in a holistic manner. So I wanted to just talk about really quickly one more proposal for solving the water crisis. And I wanted to use two case studies of Utah and Arizona to describe the problem. First of all, Utah is one of the states in the Colorado River system that starts the headwaters of the Colorado River, where the water goes all the way down and then produces electricity and provides water for agriculture and so forth. But it is a desert state. It depends on the snow melt from the Rocky Mountains, and it is that then goes into the groundwater systems and reservoirs to provide water for the farms and ranchers all throughout the state. However, it is a closed system and it is running out of water. In the northern part of Utah, for example, there's a very big problem with the Great Salt Lake, which you can see right here on the map. It is running dry. It has dropped 11 feet in height, and now the lake bed is drying up and blowing poisonous dust all over the city of Salt Lake. So they have a severe problem both on their whole reservoir, on this fact that the Great Salt Lake is blowing this hazardous dust, and they'll be losing, even though they've done a lot to husband this whole system. They have a long history of being very proactive. They see water. The early settlers in the state were Mormons in the 1890s that built the first irrigation systems with shovels. They then irrigated 90% of the farms. That irrigation system was later bolstered by the Bureau of Reclamation that built out reservoirs, hydroelectric dams, irrigation systems, especially in the 30s through the 50s. You can see all of these systems right here. Each one of them has a little agricultural administration that oversees it and monitors it. They've been very careful at husbanding it. All of their universities work on, the geologists work on these systems to make sure that they stay, well preserved in their use. However, this agricultural use has really pulled the water out faster than the snow melt and the precipitation can fill the reservoirs and the groundwater back up again. So they have a severe water shortage in the north part of the state. And then they have the problem of an 82% decline in the level of water, shallow groundwater throughout the whole state. So that's these are all closed systems, and they'll have to work at making sure that they are not pulling water out faster than it can be naturally replenished by nature. But what they came up with was in 2026, they came up with a Great Lakes Strike Task Force, which was a very collaborative effort from their universities and their legislature to pass about 6 different laws to relax the restrictions on water sale in the state, so that with the aim that they would buy water rights from agricultural users and then use that water to refill up the Great Lake. That's their plan. It's a great plan. They have lots and lots of monitoring going on here. However, it does suffer from a fatal flaw, and that is if they do not cut back the water use from agriculture that they use then to send to fill up the Great Salt Lake, they'll be declining their water levels, groundwater levels, faster than they were before. So that's the difficulty there. Arizona.
Alphecca, when you get a chance, we probably need to.
Okay, Arizona is another case.
Questions piling up.
All right. Arizona is another case study. It gets water through the Central Arizona Project Aqueduct. That's pictured right here. That water goes to cities like Tucson and Phoenix. But that water is about to be cut down, as Don said, by up to 48% because of the whole problem on the Colorado River. Separately, 80% of the land in Arizona gets its water for shallow groundwater wells. And they have a lot of alfalfa farms in these areas, that each one of these pivots right here has a well in the center that sucks the water very quickly out of the ground too fast for it to be replenished by limited rainfall. The rule of capture states that if you have a well on your land, you could suck as much water out of it as you want, even if it takes down the water level from the town next door. And that's what's happening. There's very little regulation of all of this water use in the state. So we have another proposal for the bank, the National Infrastructure Bank, that can be covered, and that is drilling for some different kind of water. It's called primary water or deep-seated water, which is water that originates miles and miles below the Earth's surface. It doesn't show up on that radar picture that I showed you up above, but it comes up through the Earth's mantle, through cracks in mountainous rocks and rock fissures. And it can be identified with specific geologic technology to actually pinpoint within a foot or two where this fissure is and drill into the fissure to capture this water from below. Just to compare how much water is here, the National Geologic Society estimates that there are 33,000 trillion gallons of water 5 miles below the earth in this mantle. And to compare that to the figures that Don just told you about billions here or billions there, this is 33 trillion gallons of water. It tests differently and it can be dug up. An example is Lake Elsinore, California, that has 3 wells that have been pumping since the 1960s to keep the lake full, with no shallow groundwater depletion nearby. So we could provide money for that as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks, Alphecca. As usual, very good. So this brings us to our Q&A, and we have actually 2 questions lined up right now. And we will call on Joy Garrett, Representative Joy Garrett of New Mexico, for the first question.
Thanks. Actually, my only question is to send the slides out. As a New Mexican legislator, I've talked with numerous people about possible conveyances. They always state the quality of the water. And so that's just an ongoing question, how we ensure the quality of the water, especially going through the Rockies, as you mentioned, the 6,000 foot heights from Louisiana. So I have a lot of questions, but I would like the slides to show some of the people I've talked to. This was quite an inspiring presentation.
Great. Thank you, Joy. And Representative, I'm a former representative myself from Washington State, so I know exactly what you're going through down there. So having said that, I'm sure we're happy to provide all the information that you'll need. As a matter of fact, maybe even too much. So that's what happened to me when I first asked for a little bit of information. So, but this is a good group of people. Why don't we move on to, is it Mr. Brower? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, it's DeBrower.
DeBrower, sorry, sir.
So I did some calculation. I got a little echo here. Sorry. I did some calculations of how much energy it would take to get the water, and I didn't see any of that in Mr. Siefkes or Don's presentation. And I was trying to reach out to him, but I haven't been able to talk to him yet. And just to look at the engineering, the feasibility, the cost, and it's quite a challenge because compared to oil, it's a much greater volume, and then of course the value, the cost of the water that's like per gallon is much less than oil. So it's anyway, that I wanted to talk, like when I heard that Don was working on going to present on this, and then I heard canals mentioned, that's not going to work. But that was just that's a minor detail. But to make a pipeline, it's all uphill. So you need a pipeline, and it has to be very large diameter to probably get to what he's talking about.
Okay.
And
yeah,
I was
Don,
just looking at the cost of that and what's been done around the world, and it's quite a challenge. So I definitely appreciate and I'm really interested in seeing that a project like that succeed. But how, what's realistic, feasible, and so I maybe at another date I could present something what I've found. But this is like, there's been a lot of research and ideas about this in the past, and it's kind of a massive engineering challenge. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's all I wanted to say.
And I think Don
It
can
needs to
probably
be
respond.
covered.
Can I share my, Giles, very good question, very good point. Can I share my screen again?
Yes.
Okay, let me. Slideshow. All right. Here's the cost of getting that stuff up here. It really, when you think about it, what we're proposing is from the Chapalaya River to Glen Canyon Dam. Let's just focus on that. Although you got to study San Juan and the Lake Tahoe too. But anyway, from the Chapalaya to Glen Canyon is 3,500 feet. We want to lift 3.5 trillion gallons of water. At 100% efficiency, that's going to take 38 billion kilowatt hours of electricity. That's simple math. You never get 100% efficiency, but electric motors are very efficient. So at 80% efficiency, which is reasonable, you're going to need 48 billion kilowatt hours of electricity to lift 3.5 trillion gallons of water 3,500 feet. That's just fixed by physics and chemistry. The United States uses 4 trillion kilowatt hours per year of electricity in this country for everything. So 48 billion over 2.2 years, because we're talking about doing this over a 2-year period, that means 22 billion kilowatt hours per year. That's 1/2 of 1% of the annual United States of America usage of electricity. Now the deal is, this is really pumped hydro storage, but the approach to the dam when the water comes up is long, 1,200 miles, not a few hundred feet like it is in most places, but still it amounts to pumped hydro storage. And when that water comes back down through Glen Canyon and Lake Mead, you're going to get back 80% of that. So really we're talking about using 0.1% of the current grid volume of electricity in the United States. Now, yes, you have to pump. You're going to need about, those oil pipelines have about 39 pumping stations to get the oil from East Texas to New Jersey. Look, we're not conveyance builders. Okay, that's why you need the Army Corps that knows how to do this. But the California Aqueduct has a bunch of pumps to get the water from where it is in Northern California down to Los Angeles. The big pumping station on the California Aqueduct is in Edmonston, California, 2,000 feet straight up, okay, over the Tehachapi Mountains into the Los Angeles Basin. The Central Arizona Project, CAP, Jim Hanley may have better numbers than I do. The high point on CAP is about 2,800 feet. So we know how to pump. And yes, you're going to have to pump it up. It'd be stepwise to get it up there, but it's certainly an engineering feat that we know how to do. And with the advent across, you would probably, if you actually did this, you'd probably follow Interstate I-40 most of the way across Texas and New Mexico, and which makes it easier to get the stuff out there, but to build this thing. But we're not talking about very sophisticated technology. Any electricity that couldn't be supplied by the existing grid could be easily supplied with solar panels with the best new lithium iron, IRON, not the same batteries they use in cars, but storage batteries. You can pump 24/7. And I just don't see that being a problem. Because for heaven's sakes, the Army Corps installed, after Hurricane Katrina, they installed pumps in New Orleans that can pump 184,000 gallons of water a second. And they tested it, it works. There's never going to be a problem of flooding in New Orleans again, because they know how to move water. And so anyway, to answer your question, the specific number we need is 22 billion kilowatt hours per year, which is a very tiny amount. And you have to recognize that most of that's going to come back to us in the form of electricity. And I don't think that's unusual. And then the Army Corps and the people that built CAP know how to do this. It's a question of putting them to work to do it. And to get them to work, you got to get Congress to tell them to do it. So that's where we stand. But that's a very good question, though.
Great, thank you, Don. And let's move on to the next question. I have, I'm going by order. So Brinson Willis. You have your hand up. Would you go next?
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Brinson Willis, and I'm essentially the state chemist for New Mexico. That's not really my title, but I'm the head of probably the lead chemist for the environment department. And so anyway, really nice to hear another one of my representatives and meet her, Ms. Alphecca. Pleasure. Just a little thing on the energy. I was really interested in hearing more about not today, but the siphoning energy that could be saved probably across the Colorado, in places like the Sierras. Siphoning sounded great. But really, what I wanted to say is that we're starting a nonprofit, and instead of Ms. Alphecca, and instead of looking at water quantity, we're looking at water quality and the particulate quality on the basin of the floor of the Great Salt Lake. So we're rounding out our board of members, and I'd like to kind of touch base with you if you could share your email and phone number with me. You could give me a call. My phone number is 505-453-0950. Pretty much any time, but we're looking at what happens when it dries up. We're not sure that the money's going to make it there in time, even though our President Trump has kind of offered some $1 billion or something for it. But
Brinson, I think you're talking about State Representative Joy Garrett, who talked about the water quality.
Okay, enjoy. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll probably go ahead and get with Miss Alphecca and Joy. If you could give me a call too, that'd be great.
Okay. So we'll just connect you, Brinson, with staff after at the end of the meeting. Would that be okay?
Have a good day.
Okay, thanks, Brinson. So Jim Hanley, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you. I live in Tucson and born and raised here in Tucson, and so I have followed the water issue probably better than the average citizen here. And one of the things I wanted to mention, Don mentioned my name, is that Tucson, the elevation of Tucson is 2,200 feet. And Tucson is the terminus of the CAP. And so if the Colorado River is at sea level, I don't know. I haven't checked that out to know if the Colorado River is at sea level, but the Colorado River is the source for the CAP. Then the water is raised 2,200 feet from the from the confluence to the terminus. And by the way, Tucson has an allocation of the CAP, and it has never used all of its allocation. And wisely, the city of Tucson stores its excess water from the CAP through groundwater. We pump it back. We pump it back into the aquifer is what we do with our excess. The other thing I wanted to ask Don, because frequently people raise this question, and so as a devil's advocate, I wanted to ask Don if his cost estimates, and I believe that it is, a very good estimate to understand what is the cost per mile of building interstate freeway and apply that to the cost of building a conveyance system. I think that's fair. But oftentimes people ask, does that include property acquisition costs? Is the cost per mile of interstate freeway, does that include property acquisition costs? And we also know that there is also legal costs, because oftentimes when you're crossing private property with a public transportation system, or in this case, the water conveyance system, it takes time to litigate property acquisition costs. So I don't, does it, as far as you know, Don, does the highway costs include that property acquisition costs?
And that's as
Don?
far as I know. That $634 billion number I quoted came off the what do you call it? The Federal Highway Administration database, and that includes everything. the acquisition cost, the arguments over eminent domain, all those things. Yes, that is a what do you call it? A complete cost. So I think it's a very reasonable cost per mile. I think the best way to look at this is you're digging. Most of it would end up being a concrete lined ditch. Okay. Since the 1930s and the 1960s, the digging capability has really improved. They have a thing called I forget the name of it. It's a monster machine. It's used in Germany to dig off, to strip dirt off of coal seams. I can't remember the name of it. I got a picture of it. Everybody wants to say it. Anyway, no, that's an all-inclusive cost. But the best cost to compare is the Colorado River Aqueduct. You extrapolate the cost of that thing through very rough terrain across the Mojave Desert, just like going across the desert between Phoenix and Tucson for CAP. This was done back in the 1930s, and they had to use siphons because it goes up and down. Lake Havasu is at 400 feet, by the way. The elevation for the intake at Lake Havasu for CAP is 400 feet above sea level. You have to get it up to, say, 2,200 at Tucson. Someplace in between there, it goes up to 2,800. I don't know if there's siphons on the Central Arizona project, but they may have done it another way, but the Romans invented doing siphon aqueducts 2,000 years ago. That's where that technology comes from. And I know there's 144 siphons on the Colorado River Aqueduct because it goes up and down through the mountain ranges, the Sierra Nevadas and whatever other mountains that it goes from Lake Havasu over to Los Angeles. So I think the most that you could possibly spend would be extrapolating the cost of building the Colorado River Aqueduct, which, as I said, also included building Parker Dam, which forms Lake Havasu. Without Parker Dam, you don't have the Central Arizona Project, and without the Central Arizona Project, you don't have Tucson or Phoenix. So that's the bottom line on this. And the bottom line is there's a lot of water around. Like James said, there's too much water in some places. To support James's comments on that thing about oysters and water farming, the Nature Conservancy a couple of years ago, a very respected organization, I think probably one of the best in the United States, published a paper where they felt there was too much water in the Atchafalaya River because it was interfering with them planting trees and other environmental concerns on that river, and they wanted the Army Corps to not put so much water in it, but the Army Corps won't do that. They're fixated 70-30. 70% of the entire Mississippi watershed goes down the main channel of the Mississippi. You can't take main channel water from the Mississippi. That is a huge political problem. 30% of the entire Mississippi watershed from the eastern slope of the Rockies to the western slope of the Appalachia goes down the Atchafalaya, and that water doesn't do anything, and it really has no political base. And taking it would certainly help the situation that James was talking about along the Gulf Coast, and it would improve and let us fix once and for all this problem on the Colorado River.
Great, thank you, Don. Randy Grind, my old friend from the University of Washington, next. Randy, go ahead.
Hi, Don. I'd also looked at some calculations of the energy required to perform this. I was looking at putting it into Lake Powell, and in round numbers, we're looking at about 200 gigawatts. So it's not unreasonable. But I do have a second question, and that is, replacing the water that is deficit in the system right now is one thing. How much is going to be needed on an ongoing basis? Do we know that yet?
That question for me? On an
Yes,
ongoing
Don.
basis, that's a good question. I'd have to think about that.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking, we're sort of focused on the short-term problem, but on an ongoing basis, we'd have to figure out
what the long-term climate's going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's a fair answer, and I like it. I like the idea a lot. It's huge, but we can do big things still.
Yeah.
Great.
The beauty of the system, there's a lot of places in Texas and New Mexico that need water. So properly designed, look, I said we're not conveyance designers. That has to be done by the people that design CAP or the Army Corps of Engineers. But there's a lot of places where you could have little water things shunting off of this, okay, to deliver water to where it's needed. And I like the thing about comparing oil because we think nothing about moving oil around this country. That Alaska pipeline oil is 800 miles long. It was built, I looked it up, over 70,000 people worked on that line to get it built. It's a big task. Yes, it's a big project, but we've built big projects in this country before. That oil comes from off of Prudhoe Bay. It has to go through over 30 major streams, up mountains, down mountains, and you have to heat that oil
John,
all the way down.
Yep.
we have to move to Mr. Ferry. I think he's available now. Joel, are
Okay.
you available?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. The issue was my boss, the director of the Department of Natural Resources for Utah, is Joel Ferry. I'm just sitting in for him. So that's why I wasn't responding to his name. I thought that he had maybe joined online, and then I saw that he
Okay.
had. So
That's the name
apologize for
that's
that.
popping up on the window. So
Yeah. Very interesting. Appreciate everyone gathering together to think through some of these problems. So I'm an engineer focused primarily on Great Salt Lake and do a lot of Colorado River issues. And I think one concern, in hearing about these like large problems, particularly from folks who haven't been involved in it for, professionally or maybe are thinking from outside our states, is there's a lot of complexity and nuance that is missed in kind of generalizing plans like these. So I think they're interesting at a high planning level, but when it comes to actual feasibility, there are a whole host of issues that us working locally are aware of. So I think connecting those pieces is important. And then another thought, I guess this is just a kind of a general question for the audience is, as Don mentioned, it's kind of a short-term solution. And from an engineering perspective, we're always thinking about identifying what the problem is. And that if we think through and identify what the problem is, then we're at least halfway to the solution. And I think some of the problems that a project like this is intended to address are problems that were created by leaning on technological or large projects. So, a lot of the issues in the Mississippi Sound are not a result of nature so much as a result of man's interference with nature. And so we're trying to solve problems that we've created by, working on other projects. So I think that there's this concept that we can't solve our problems with the same thinking that we use to create them. And so there certainly are problems, but I think a combination of technology and projects as well as adaptation, maybe a migration, changes in mentality of what growth looks like, what our economic model looks like. those are some of, I think, the bigger ideas that may be sustainable into the next 100, 500 years or something, right? We're not trying to just survive for the next 50 years, but maybe we want to be around 1,000 years. What's that what kind of solutions do we want to look at? So just a couple of thoughts there. Yep.
Can we get your name for the record?
Yeah, it's Jake Sarago.
Thank you, Jake. And
yeah. Appreciate the time.
Sure, sure.
Could I comment just a real quick, since I'm so glad that the university, that Utah geologists and engineers joined our call. I'm so glad, given that I sent you the notice on just a couple of days ago. We would be happy to have a separate talk just with you. I have read the entire Great Salt Lake report. I was very, very impressed with it. All those nuances that you're talking about were covered in the report. I still did not see a general solution for what I see is the number one problem for you, and that is you've had an 8-foot decline in the Great Salt Lake sea level because you're pulling water out faster than it is being replenished by nature. You say in the report that you're going to have a doubling of population in the area, and now one interim solution is to buy water rights from farmers to fill up the Great Salt Lake, which is a great proposal, but I didn't see any plan for cutting back agricultural use. If you do both, then you're going to be pulling down the lake faster than was just my, as a lay observer, and I'm not an expert in any of these things, believe me, but I just really like the idea, and I wanted to offer the primary water solution as a possible side aid that might help you. You have a lot of rock fissures there. You can pull this water out. It will not affect the shallow groundwater levels, and then you can refill the lake with lots of these wells all along the side of the fault. So I would love to have a talk with your folks in a separate matter, in a separate call.
We look forward to that. That's
Super.
Great. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We'll get you connected. That's great. Thank you, Jake. And I have, I'm not sure she's still on. Miriam, are you there, Miriam? Okay, so let's move on to Ellen Brown. You're on.
Okay. Thanks, Alphecca, for bringing up the primary water option, which I think is great. It's been very successful in Africa in local areas, but also in Libya, the great man-made river project was apparently primary water, and it's pristine water. I mean, it turned the whole desert green until, of course, we bombed the pipes in our. Anyway,
yeah, so I've absolutely drunk that water. So my husband was Libyan, and I've many times been there trying to make tea with salty water because the water's coming up underneath the table and into the city's aquifer. So I did drink from some of that water.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up. That's all.
Well, great. Okay, are there any other questions?
Al Henderson.
Al, yep, he's not coming up on my screen. Al?
Yes, I'm not technology savvy, and I wandered all over my monitor here to see where the chat box sign was. So my apology for waiting, but I think it's important for me to ask everybody a question. But before that, let me tell you that I'm a member, an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation. And I have now served, I'm retired really, and I pretty much had a political career briefly with the Navajo tribal government. And within the last couple of years, there have been a lot of negotiation over water rights issues between the state of Arizona and also the New Mexico, diverting off of the Little Colorado River and the Colorado up the San Juan River, etc. The northern border of the Navajo Reservation is the water line, and you talked a little bit about the upper and the lower basin. I didn't realize that it was coming due on the 26th, which actually puts an urgency flag on the whole question that we're faced with and talked about. So I really appreciate the information. My question is, the involvement in this particular discussion at this level by a representative of the Navajo Nation, has there been a reach out to them? I know they have a Navajo Nation Water Rights Commission, but they're pretty much devoted to legal stuff. I'm more interested in the details, the outcomes, and the results of such a massive project. Construction, jobs, revenue, and the ongoing water allocation and distribution. Now, I watch the NASA climate change reports from time to time, and I've advised some of the politicians here of the serious desertification of land. At least a third of the tribal reservation is rapidly undergoing sandstorms. So the arable lands are beginning to constrict. They're disappearing. And one of the friend who I met with at the community level meeting not long ago was literally screaming, saying that we have a water shortage. I'm very, very concerned about that, only because of the way in which it's been handled historically and currently in practice. So this would be a very welcoming project, and I've articulated it with my limited knowledge and participation in this group meetings. And I thank you very much for allowing me to say a few words and encourage the involvement of tribes at some level, because you will have to do that. And Joel is correct. The detail is where this thing is going to either move fast or go at a snail's level. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm so glad, Mr. Henderson, that you joined our call. You have been on my mailing list for the last 2 years at least, and I've been keeping my eye on the Navajo Nation. There are several aspects to our proposal that can really, really help. First of all, my preference would be to take our water from this pipeline, drop it off in the San Juan River, even though that's a higher elevation. Why? Because that San Juan River is connected to a new aqueduct that goes north and south in New Mexico to drop water into the Navajo Nation, but does not have any water because the San Juan River is too low. So that's one aspect that we think we can work on. Another is to get more primary water wells in to stop this desertification. That's been used by the Bureau of Reclamation in some of their national parks to grow more trees and things like that, using these primary wells as an irrigation system. So we think we can help a lot with the primary well technology as well.
Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Al. Appreciate it. Are there any more questions? Any more questions? Any more questions? Okay. Why don't we move on to our ending slides? This is the announcement for the May 19th congressional briefing, and I think Angela's going to take this. Or am I?
All right, I need to. Okay, so on May 19th, in collaboration with Congressman Danny Davis's office, the Coalition for the National Infrastructure Bank will be doing a special briefing in Congress at the Rayburn Building at 12 noon. This will go on for about an hour or so. All of the congressional offices and all of the staff for these offices are going to be invited. We will have 5 to 6 speakers. Some of the speakers who are on this call are also going to speak. We want to get maximum attendance. As Alphecca went through, we have 58 members of Congress who are co-sponsors of the bill. We want to get more. This is our opportunity to make an argument to the members of Congress on why they should sign the bill. So we're asking you to contact your member of Congress and invite them to the meeting. Ask them to send a representative. You can see the phone number there that you need to call. You'll get the switchboard and ask for your member of Congress. And if you would like to send them an email invitation, just email me. You can email me at angelamvulo@gmail.com. And if you want any extra help, again, Angela M. Vullo, V like Victor, ULLO @gmail.com. We'd be happy to help. But we want to get, 50 to 100 members of Congress or staff to attend this briefing. As you know, it's a very dire political crisis now, very partisan, and we're intervening with a solution that can recruit both Democrats and Republicans. Back
Great.
to you, Brian.
Okay, great. Thank you, Angela. And then we have another slide. There we go. So the NIB, the National Infrastructure Bank, is solely a volunteer effort. And I'm sure everyone's impressed with the depth of knowledge and background that everyone has that brings to the table. But, just like I'm an elected treasurer up here in Snohomish County, but just like anything, getting this passed, it was a heavy lift getting to almost 60 sponsors. And I know when I first got involved, I started with a couple of meetings. Now it's been a couple dozen. The work is relentless. So anything you can do financially, and no amount is too small. So $5, $10, $100, $1,000, whatever you can do, but also spreading the word and getting the word out about the NIB and these proposals, dealing with the crisis of infrastructure across the country is going to be critical. And I always said, nobody cares about infrastructure until the bridge falls into the river. And right. And then us good politicians get the headline, and then we move on to our same old business. So this is getting the word out. I'll leave you with this. We got a National Association of Counties to support this. And with over 3,250 counties, almost unanimously supported the resolution and the NIB's efforts. And in almost all of those counties are rural red counties. So they know how important infrastructure is, and that with the exponential spending at the federal level right now, it's even more dire that we push this to the finish line. So having said that, I think we have a final slide with our website, our Facebook page, and our email. And I'm pretty sure there's a donation button on every one of them. And or give us a call and any questions. I know Alphecca, Don, and James would be happy to answer any questions. If you have any specific questions related to, local infrastructure and finance, I'm certainly available anytime as well. So having said that, I think that wraps it up.